this chapter, we're really going to start to dig into the physicalities of the camera, really take you through every aspect of what you can see. So James, I guess the first place to start with is the sensor. This is, as we've mentioned before, a very high grade 16-bit sensor, but it's the lens mount which is the most interesting. This is the Canon EF lens mount. Talk me through what's so good about this.
Well, I mean, BlackMagic have designed this clearly with the biggest number of lenses that are going to fit onto this camera, and that's Canon glass. They're the biggest number of lenses in the market.
Well, a lot of DSLR users will already have Canon glass. I think that was the whole point of it. So by that means you've got these contacts here.
Yeah, it's an electronic mount, and this is a good point to note because what it offers us iris control on the camera. It also offers image stabilizing because it will power the lenses as
well.
If
your lens has image stabilizing built in, this camera will talk to that lens. That's huge.
It is huge, yeah. It's one of the most exciting features
well, particularly
of the camera
given that, you know, when you talked about, you shared with me the stuff you'd done with Coldplay in the summer, you'd used that on an FS700 largely, and you used image stabilization. That was a huge deal. So, you know, practical applications when you're running around with minimal gear, having that image stabilizer makes a huge difference. In fact, I was filming in Scotland recently, and I took the very bare minimum of equipment, a very lightweight tripod, couple of, I think it was 17-55 Canon image stabilized lens, and I went to film in basically a blizzard. Have a look at this.
So I'm filming here in what's called the East Nuke of Fife, which is on the east coast of Scotland. It's a pretty blustery day. In fact, it's blowing quite a gale. What's interesting here is that the image stabilization on this Canon 17-55 in these conditions is staggering. It's actually giving us what appears to be very stable images in a condition that is frankly, well, I mean, look at it, it's pretty brutal out there. I don't know if you can really come across the camera just how windy it is, but it's very, very gusty. Ordinarily a lens without image stabilization just won't be able to handle this kind of shock at all. And that's one of the great things with this camera, is it's in this tiny configuration here. I've got just a tiny lightweight tripod, but I'm able to get these sequences here. So have a look at this image sequence now and see what you think. I think this is quite an interesting point about this camera. Very inexpensive lens, very inexpensive camera, giving us this quality of image, which is even a bigger camera with a sturdier tripod would struggle in these conditions. It's pretty amazing.
So that scenario really demonstrates what was frankly pretty unpleasant environment. But the image stabilizer on the lens and the camera made that shot absolutely rock solid. So image stabilizing, really, really great advantage in this camera. And that's not something that normally you have in a cinema camera. No. But this is where it transcends cinema and the best parts, if you like, of DSLR.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very interesting combination to have on the camera. And it also translates into some of the controls we'll look at in a minute on the back of the camera, because by being able to have control, electronic control over your aperture, there are things you can do with your exposure which will also help in the back of the camera.
So much about this camera is just so solid. I mean, this is just a milled piece of aluminium lens cap, and it's got such a solid click when you put that onto the camera, a big solid button here. And so you have a great deal of confidence when you lock your mount in place. It really does feel like it's going to be very, very solid. No surprise, there's a record button here. That's no accident. It's very accessible. Just worth mentioning here, this is the inbuilt microphone. Now the inbuilt microphone is pretty pony. It's really not usable for much. It sounds like the sound you get from a GoPro when you're underwater in the plastic housing. So, you know, you can't really use that for anything other than a reference.
But give me one of those any day over not having one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's so useful to just be able to film with the camera this size and have some audio going into it.
Actually, I'm thinking I might, maybe, you know, the Rycoat have these little over covers, which are little sticky back plastic wind gags for microphones. Might be useful to put one of them on there, just to kind of stop that wind coming out. Just while we're on here, onto the bottom of the camera, it's got a single, I think that's what, a 1/4 20 screw hole with a locating pin. I would quite like to have seen more mounting points in this, if I'm honest. But I guess what they've done is there's 3 mounting points across the top of the camera here, and because it's one solid piece of aluminium, it's not going to go anywhere. But I want to just talk about this here, James, because this is a really important part of the camera's image sensor, isn't it? This is the air inlet, and this is the air outlet, and this is a refrigerated sensor. Can you talk to me a bit about why that is so important to keep these clear?
Well, anybody who's filmed with a DSLR camera, particularly the 5D Mark II, will know just how frustrating it is when you're doing a long take or something and the camera overheats. And that's all because that camera was not designed to be used as a video camera for filming for hours on end. So obviously this is designed for filming and designed to have to take long durations of takes. So it's crucial that the sensor is cooled so that it doesn't overheat. And if it were to overheat, what you would start to see, we've been told, is an actual degradation to the image. You'd start to see hot pixels occurring. So the last thing you want to do is to basically use any accessories which completely cover up these air intakes.
Because they've actually, there's a chamfer here, there's probably a 1 or 2 millimeter chamfer, so the camera, when it sits flat, the air comes in under the front and out the back, so it's just something really important to be aware of. Let's just move to this side of the camera, James. This is obviously the SSD caddy, where we've got our, you pull that out of there.
So we've got a drive in here already, which we'll come back to talk about in the media. But I mean, I've used a product which is very similar to this camera, the HyperDeck Shuffle, which really you can see how BlackMagic have designed a HyperDeck Shuffle with a nice capacitive touchscreen on the back and a very high image quality sensor on the front. And you know, we can start to see the amalgamation of some of their products here. Yeah. And being able to record straight onto SSD is something which we'll go on to talk about, but to be able to record straight in this format without putting any other boxes or recording media onto the camera.
And you know, even this is metal, you know, everything's metal. Just worth mentioning here, there's a mini USB input here, and that is where you plug your camera into the camera software to update firmware in the camera. So that's worth bearing in mind there, but it's nice it's protected and tucked away there.
It will also actually recharge the camera through the USB. It will take quite a long time to do it, but if you were completely stuck, then you could recharge the internal battery.
I didn't know that. I've learned something myself.
Through the USB.
Right, let's move on to this side of the camera, James. Do you want to just talk us through all of these inputs and outputs?
Well, yeah, this side is clearly where the fun is, because to start with we have a remote jack right at the top, and
that's for LANC control.
This is for LANC control, and
that will start and stop recording.
It will start, stop. It will allow you to change aperture, and it will also allow you focus control as well. All of those things
so if you can get a compatible device, you can do all those things. That's very useful.
You've then got a headphone jack, and something again which really has been designed looking at DSLRs and some of the trappings of DSLRs, the fact that you couldn't monitor your audio. Well, here we've got a nice 3.5mm headphone jack straight away. Underneath that, there's audio inputs.
Now these are a bit controversial, aren't they? I had a discussion on Twitter a couple of days ago with a chap who was a sound recordist who was making a fairly wild statement that, you know, until this had XLRs, it wasn't a pro camera. And I can understand why some people might feel like that, but don't be put off by the jacks.
I think the truth is, if it had XLRs, we wouldn't see it coming in at this size. There's simply no way BlackMagic would have got a camera this size with 2 balanced XLR jacks on them. So what they've gone for is the next best thing, which is balanced 1/4" jacks. And yes, that means that you don't have powered inputs, you don't have phantom power from the camera, but there are workarounds to that. So that's not something to be put off by.
So unlike DSLRs and other cameras at that kind of price point where you're dealing with HDMI, this camera doesn't have HDMI, so this should please a lot of people because it's actually got HD-SDI, it's got BNC connector, hasn't it?
Completely. I think this is part of the cinema camera design point, is that it has an HD-SDI output, and this is a much more robust connector. You're not going to have the lead just coming out as it often does with an HDMI lead.
But we've discovered that it's not all as it seems on the output signal, because it's actually a progressive signal, which means it doesn't work on certain EVFs and monitors.
That's correct. You have to bear in mind this camera is designed as a progressive camera. There's no interlaced option on it, and which, you know, for a lot of people is a downside, because they would like to use it in television scenarios where unfortunately they still need to work in an interlaced format. But I certainly worship the fact that it's a progressive camera, because I love a progressive image.
Well, I know for a fact, because I've got a metal EVF from Cineroid, that it doesn't work on that. But the new Cineroid Retina display, we have actually tried it on, it does work on that. So you just need to bear in mind that some of your existing accessories may not work on a progressive output signal. And then something here very close to my heart, as I've been using Thunderbolt for some time. We've got a Thunderbolt port, haven't we? Oh, it's SDI, it's a Thunderbolt, just there.
Yeah, without doubt the most unique port for this camera to have, and the only camera currently, as we're recording this, to have a Thunderbolt connector on it. And I think this shows a lot of potential for where it will go. Right now there's a few applications for the Thunderbolt on it. You can take a Thunderbolt signal out to a laptop with a Thunderbolt in, and you can run ultrascopes, so it will give you metering. You can see audio metering, vector, wave scope,
and ultrascope is another piece of software that BlackMagic Design make, which they sell for about $600-700, I believe, which is free bundled with the camera. I have to say, in all practical applications, I've used it in the studio here. We did a bunch of filter tests and we used ultrascope on the laptop. Having a Thunderbolt cable hanging out the camera on location outdoors, I can't see quite yet being in a position where I do that. But certainly if you're in a studio environment, it does give you that electronic measurement you're after.
I think it has more application for a studio environment, certainly. And another application of the Thunderbolt port currently is that you can also record from the Thunderbolt straight into BlackMagic's Media Express, which is, I believe, free software as well, straight off their website. So the Thunderbolt right now has two purposes: to monitor information on the camera and to record straight out. You can't do what a lot of people would think, and actually take your footage off the camera via Thunderbolt.
That's a shame.
So that's something it doesn't do.
But maybe that'll do something in the future, who knows?
Yeah, it's a very future-proofed concept to put Thunderbolt on a camera like this, and I think it shows.
It's a very, very high data transfer, as well as a 10 gigabit data transfer. And then finally, we've got our power in and out, which is
12 volts
12
to
to 30. It's a pretty big range.
Yeah, it's a great range, and then I think this really, a lot of people who bemoan the fact that it has an internal battery, which we'll talk about in a minute, this makes up for the fact that you can charge this from virtually any source. And really the way to talk about an internal battery, because we can't show that, we should talk about that now. The internal battery is really designed as a UPS for the camera. I think that's the way to look at it. It's
a backup battery.
Completely. If you're going to be using, the internal battery will give you about 90 minutes of runtime, basically, which isn't bad. It's a lot more. It's a lot more than you get from a single Red Bolt in a Red Scala or a Red Epic, for example. And it means you can go and you can shoot with the camera handheld in the configuration we have here. All you need to do is stick a lens on. But for continuous use, you have to have some
form of external power.
You do.
And we're going to cover a whole chapter on external, because we both have very different systems based on the style of shooting. And then, so that's the side panel. We've talked about the bottom. On top here, we've got the sort of carry straps, which are very, very solid, and I think can be very useful for slinging the camera over your shoulder. And 3 /20 mounting points, which I've found to be, in some of the rigging situations I've used, very, very useful indeed.
Completely, yeah. And that's the thing. These we have to have mounting points on the camera. There's already lots of other cages which you can put around the camera to increase the mounting points. But I mean, it's great that BlackMagic has put at least 3 on the top here as a starting point. And just to say again, I mean, this camera is solid. You can mount anything on there. I would have little fear in actually standing on the camera, I think, because
it's that strong.
Yeah,
it really is that strong. So on to the rear of the camera. And without going into the menus too much, because we're going to dedicate a whole chapter to that, on-off switch is here. It powers up. The first thing you notice is the fan noise. That refrigerated fan does have some noise, but it's a lot quieter than the Scarlett or the Epic fans. Maybe you can talk us through the buttons. You've got a focus button here and an iris button here. What do these buttons do?
So the focus button basically puts on a light sort of focus peeking onto the image. Currently it's in white. I have hopes that they may offer users the ability to change the color, but it basically sharpens the image and gives you sort of focus peaking so that you can see the detail of the image a lot better. The iris button on the other side, this is where the electronic mount on the camera comes into use, because when paired with a lens, like an EF lens, which is communicating electronically, when you hit the iris button, it'll actually auto expose the scene for you.
So it'll give you a guide reading to start with.
Yeah.
So you press this button and it gives you a guide exposure, and then how do you then change your exposure when you're using an electronic lens?
Well, BlackMagic have really gone for the principle of putting only the essential buttons onto this camera. So you use the actual forward and back buttons here that you would use when reviewing and navigating your media to actually open and close your iris. And it's very straightforward, and you get a reading on the iris display here on the camera itself.
So you've got your record button here as well, and then your play controls are pretty self-explanatory. You've got stop, play. Show us what happens. I mean, we're going to do a whole chapter on the menu, but basically you come in here.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing to note is that the screen we're looking at is a capacitive 5-inch touchscreen. And again, this is BlackMagic's idea of making a camera which is very user-friendly. It feels much more like an Apple product, to be honest. It feels like, you know, a combination, if Apple were to make a video camera, you know, and the combination of an iPhone, all of these things that, you know, we're very used to having touch screens, and it just offers a lot of functionality. As we'll see later on, there's a few functions that are very useful, that you can double tap the screen and go straight into a focus zoom using single tap.
So that's a big point. So you double tap the screen and it punches in to give you, what, 1-to-1 pixel mapping?
Yes, and this is huge because it does it whilst you're recording as well. And so I know a lot of cameras.
You can check if you're feeling slightly anxious, slightly off in your focus. Double tap it, punch in. Doesn't affect the recording. It gives you that confidence.
Yeah, and to have it whilst recording is fantastic. There's a lot of cameras which are 5 times the price which won't do that whilst recording.
That's very useful.
And it's still a function that doesn't exist on the 5D.
And if you single tap the screen, so you double tap to punch in, double tap to punch out. What happens if you single tap the screen?
And single tapping brings up basically the camera slate. And this is where you get into entering your metadata.
Okay. So you can add all sorts of information, title, what's that there?
Project name, reel, scene, shot, take, close-up angle, and then comments and keywords. And it has to be said that metadata on the camera is something, again, very unique to the BlackMagic camera, and something which I think was really, it's very a future thinking idea, but something that certainly has come from people who work in post-production. They can see the benefit in putting
because
metadata
you could
in.
finish a shoot, for example, and be sitting in the car or the train or the plane home, go back through your shots and add information, comments, keywords, save all of that information, and that will transfer through to your NLE. Now, it doesn't do everything quite yet, but you've done some research with Final Cut Pro 10, and what kind of information currently in January 2013, and this is all subject to change because this is an ever-evolving tool. What have you found transfers across at the minute?
Well, one thing I always do is I make sure I have my camera named accordingly to my project. So if I have 3 cameras, I'll have this camera is maybe camera A, another camera is camera B, and then immediately all of these camera names come in and you know immediately which camera is which. Also, I found it very useful to enter comments in, because when entering comments, you could very easily turn these into smart folders within Final Cut and start to separate out your footage. And this is all about fast tracking your way into the edit. That's the future thinking of having
and also starting at the back end. You know, starting with post. Your entire career has been built on post-production and metadata and tagging and archiving and file folder structures. It's very new to me as a DP because, to be honest, we tend to just kind of shoot it, light it and hand it over. But it is interesting to know that you can input data here which shows up, and it's only now that I'm using Final Cut 10 in Anger and Resolve that I see the value of missing out that step. If I can create my chapters, if you like, on location and import everything into Final Cut 10 and it's already there, I don't have to go through the keyboard phase, I don't have to go through the segmenting phase, so it really does sort of speed everything up. So that's really interesting, and then we're going to cover a whole chapter on this because I think this is really important. And you've got obviously a keyboard on there. It's just like an iPad, isn't it? So I think that pretty much covers the camera. I think we should move on to delving into the menus and really working out, you know, what each menu does and why it's relevant and how it's going to apply to making your life easier as a shooter.